Wildlife management is a very important topic, concept, and practice that is near and dear to me personally and professionally. I have always had a passion for nature and animals, large and small, since childhood. I was always fascinated with any creature that I came across, and would try and bring anything home for my mother that I found. That childhood passion and fascination translated into my adult life and career, into a much deeper understanding and respect for the natural world, and what that means for my own place and all of life. There are many perspectives that some could take when considering what wildlife is and what importance it truly has. To some people, wildlife extends to their own backyards, watching birds and other appealing aesthetic species. To others, it could be something to hunt for food or for sport, such as white-tailed deer, waterfowl, bobcat, wolves, and bear, to name only a few. To others, wildlife can be considered a pest or a nuisance. For example, predator species which predate upon livestock, or species such as prairie dogs that create hazards or to some extent competition for grazing cattle. The beaver which clogs spillways in culverts, or felling trees that people find aesthetically appealing. For the farmer or gardener, it can be the spectrum of what wildlife means to people is so broad that one must really take a deeper look and understanding to truly appreciate the actual depth of meaning and importance that all levels of wildlife, flora and fauna, truly have for not only the natural world, but for people also. The most basic definition of wildlife management is to maintain populations of wild animals at levels consistent with the best interest of wildlife and the public. Though over time, it has become much more. With our understanding of ecology, biodiversity, and other areas of study, we have evolved the definition of wildlife management. Wildlife management implies stewardship towards a population. The welfare of native populations are dependent not solely on a specific number of animals, but that of their habitat or ecosystem. The health of the ecosystem is also directly correlated to the health of the native flora and fauna. In order to help maintain this symbiotic relationship, managers can implement a variety of practices. The first is manipulative management, which does something to a population, either by changing its numbers or by a direct means of influencing numbers, indirectly by altering food, supply, habitat, density of predators, or prevalence of disease. Custodial management is a preventative or protective management. It's aimed at minimizing external influences on a population and its habitat. Conservation is the management of a natural resource so that it can be sustained over long term. Preservation is a subset of conservation and refers to protecting a resource by withdrawing it from use. Restoration, which is also a subset of conservation, refers to returning a resource to some prior condition. These integral facets of management take many forms. The first and most important step of these is in managing the habitat that wildlife depend upon. Without the supporting ecosystem, populations will most likely collapse. Maintaining native habitat for wildlife must take into account all levels of biotic cycling in order to maintain it, from ensuring that nutrient and hydrologic cycles are functioning, that water systems are unimpaired, forests are not being choked out by invasive species, prairies are supporting a high diversity of wildflowers and other native plant species, only to name a few. If we start at the basic layer of habitat, it gives us a better opportunity to ensure that wildlife not only survives, but thrives. With that in mind, most habitat would not be able to maintain a stable existence without the wildlife that co-evolved with it. There are many species of plants that depend upon specific species of pollinators in order to germinate the next generation of that plant. There are also management practices that have to be implemented to reduce populations of wildlife. The most classic example of this would be that of the white-tailed deer. When deer populations rise past the carrying capacity of the ecosystem they inhabit, they can actually cause a collapse in their populations due to overuse of resource, ergo grazing of vegetation, which in turn leaves no food for existing population, and they starve. So in order to save the deer, ironically, we must kill them, either through hunting by individuals or culling by professionals, which are the two most common practices. The major reasons that we have to conduct these types of practices is due to the fact that in most areas of the North American US, we have created an unbalanced shift in the predator-prey dynamic of most, if not all, ecosystems by removing and eradicating predator species. Predators are the most effective control for prey species. The most widely known example of this is that of the wolf and ungulate populations. Like the white-tailed deer or elk, by eradicating wolves from an ecosystem, the ungulate populations begin to rise at an unstable rate, and the earlier example of the need for decreasing populations becomes necessary. The entire reasons behind why we must take active roles in wildlife management is to mitigate the negative impacts that humans have caused to the environment. We have caused such an upheaval in the natural balance of the ecosystems we so innately depend upon. It is vital for not only the existence of wildlife, but for that of our own existence, to survive for today and for the future. I've also put in a short video of how the wolves changed the rivers. I've watched it many times, and I hope you guys enjoy it.
One of the most exciting scientific findings of the past half-century has been the discovery of widespread trophic cascades. A trophic cascade is an ecological process which starts at the top of the food chain and tumbles all the way down to the bottom. And the classic example is what happened in the Yellowstone National Park in the United States when wolves were reintroduced in 1995. Now, we all know that wolves kill various species of animals, but perhaps we're slightly less aware that they give life to many others. Before the wolves turned up, they'd been absent for 70 years. That the numbers of deer, because there was nothing to hunt them, had built up and built up in the Yellowstone Park, and despite efforts by humans to control them, they'd managed to reduce much of the vegetation there to almost nothing. They'd just grazed it away. But as soon as the wolves arrived, even though they were few in number, they started to have the most remarkable effects. First, of course, they killed some of the deer, but that wasn't the major thing. Much more significantly, they radically changed the behavior of the deer. The deer started avoiding certain parts of the park, the places where they could be trapped most easily, particularly the valleys and the gorges. And immediately those places started to regenerate. In some areas, the height of the trees quintupled in just 6 years. Bare valley sides quickly became forests of aspen and willow and cottonwood. And as soon as that happened, the birds started moving in. The number of songbirds and migratory birds started to increase greatly. The number of beavers started to increase because beavers like to eat the trees. And beavers, like wolves, are ecosystem engineers. They create niches for other species. And the dams they built in the rivers provided habitats for otters and muskrats and ducks and fish and reptiles and amphibians. The wolves killed coyotes, and as a result of that, the number of rabbits and mice began to rise, which meant more hawks, more weasels, more foxes, more badgers. Ravens and bald eagles came down to feed on the carrion that the wolves had left. Bears fed on it too, and their population began to rise as well, partly also because there were more berries growing on the regenerating shrubs. And the bears reinforced the impact of the wolves by killing some of the calves of the deer. But here's where it gets really interesting. The wolves changed the behavior of the rivers. They began to meander less. There was less erosion. The channels narrowed. More pools formed. More riffle sections, all of which were great for wildlife habitat. The rivers changed in response to the wolves. And the reason was that the regenerating forests stabilized the banks so that they collapsed less often, so that the rivers became more fixed in their course. Similarly, by driving the deer out of some places and the vegetation recovering on the valley sides, there was less soil erosion because the vegetation stabilized that as well. So the wolves, small in number, transformed not just the ecosystem of the Yellowstone National Park, this huge area of land, but also its physical geography.